So, good afternoon, everybody, and many thanks for joining my webinar, Get That Job. Really appreciate you signing up today, and I hope this is going to be full of valuable tips for you as you're looking for a new role or thinking about it. Now, this is not going to be death by PowerPoint, but I have got some slides with imagery to illustrate the key points that I'm making and to help take us through today's content. Please do ask any questions in the chat window, or if you're listening to this on record, then do email me with your questions. My expectation today is that we'll be on this webinar for around an hour, might be a touch over, but hopefully enough time to give you some valuable tips and advice in terms of looking for a new role. So you're in the right place if you're meeting really any of these three criteria. So either you're thinking about a new role, so you're just thinking it might be something up and coming in the months to come. Some people like to prepare more in advance than others. I started working with a new client in this area last week, and her expectation is she'll actually move roles in 12 to 18 months, but she wants to start doing the preparation work, which is something we're going to come on to now. So it just depends on what suits you in terms of timing, but certainly if you're thinking about a new role, you're in the right place. Certainly if you're actively looking for a new role, I'm seeing a new client this afternoon, and she is very much entering the process of doing that. And in fact, she's just been contacted about some interviews later this week. So we're going to be immediately working on her impact interview this afternoon. So if that's you at the moment, hopefully I can give you some really valuable tips for where you're at. Or if you're just starting to think about, maybe I'll look for a new role later this year, and you want to have in mind perhaps what's involved, you're someone that likes to be prepared and think about that. So any of those boxes, if you fit into those, then hopefully this is going to be really useful for you. And the reason for running this is really it's New Year. People often start to think about their goals and objectives for the year, and looking for a new role is frequently one of those. And I do a lot of work with experienced professionals to help them make this next step in their career. And so today is all about sharing some of those key tips with you. Obviously, when I do that work with individuals, we're going very much in depth and it's tailored to them. But today is all about sharing those tips with you, so hopefully you can apply some of that to where you're at as well. So I know some of you on my email list today know me in person already, and some of you don't. If you don't, that is what I look like, as you can't see me. I'm not actually sat here in my pajamas. I am in a dress, ready to go to my next client. But this is me. I've run Inside Out Image now for 6 years, just over 6 years. And all the work I do is about helping people with their personal impact, influence, and how they engage with others to build strong professional relationships, which helps people progress their careers, and importantly for organisations, it improves the performance of their people and therefore the overall business performance. So my specialism is professional and financial services. I do work with people in other sectors. I had clients last year in consumer goods, for example, but they are my focus sectors. But certainly for this type of work, I can help you if you're in other sectors too. The work I do is three types really. I do the one-to-one work, as I've referred to already. So this is a good example, the client this afternoon. I also run a lot of group workshops, which are usually supported by one-to-one work with clients in big corporates. And I'm a speaker at events as well. So they're the three things I do. And this is one of the scenarios I work with clients on, but I do work with them on others. Really any scenario in professional life where people need to interact with others and build relationships, because we can't work in isolation. So this is one, networking skills, meetings, how to be effective, and presenting. And I also work with people on the tools of personal impact, so appearance, body language, and voice. So sometimes someone will come to me and say, you know, I need some help on looking for a new role. Sometimes someone will come to me and say, I feel I lack confidence in my body language. So those are the sorts of challenges that I help people with. And I'm specifically trained in this area of impact interview, and I did my training 6-7 years ago. This was one of the areas I focused on. And in fact, I started my career, and my year out from university was working for a recruitment consultancy in Brussels, and my job there was a candidate coordinator. So screening CVs was my job. So I've got a lot of experience in that area as well, which of course is helpful here. So hopefully that gives you a brief bit of background into me and why I'm here to help you, really, my experience. So I wanted to talk about the most common barriers that my clients tend to have to looking for a new job. These are the ones I come across most. So firstly is really where to start. And lots of people feel really overwhelmed about looking for a new job. They feel they don't know what to do first. Perhaps it's been a while since they've actually had to look for a job. Since they've been in that situation. So that's one of the reasons that sort of stops people looking for a new role until perhaps they absolutely have to or really want to. Secondly, lack of time. Most people looking for a new role are already in a day job and they're busy, and they find it hard to focus on still doing that job well and looking for a new role, especially as I work with very experienced professionals who are usually, you know, middle to senior people. They don't have lots of time for this, so it can feel a bit off-putting to do that and to take on looking for a new role. Thirdly, inertia. People just worry about moving to a new place, making a new start. They're comfortable in the culture they're in, the systems, the processes, the people know them. It feels like a massive upheaval, really, to move roles. I worked with 2 clients recently that work for a big transport organisation. One referred the other, hence why they were from the same organisation. And they both did want to move on. They took voluntary redundancy, but it did feel like a big shift for them, a big change after 14 years or so working in one organisation. So inertia is certainly something that prevents people necessarily looking for a new job quickly. And lastly, lack of confidence, a little bit related to the inertia, but when people think about going for a new role, they feel exposed. If you've heard about imposter syndrome, they start to question, oh, will people in other organisations, you know, think I'm any good? Am I as good as people really seem to think I am in my current organisation? And I think this is the biggest thing that holds people back. And what I see mostly amongst my experienced professional clients is they massively underestimate their abilities and achievements. And part of what I help them do is to really go back to basics and dig deep and bring out from them what the most important things are. And how we need to highlight those to potential new employers and recruiters. So I'd really like to just quickly flick to chat here and just get a bit of input from you to see, is it one of these barriers that you find the biggest, or is there something else? So if you'd like to type into the chat, that I'd really appreciate that. So I'm going to read some of these out because for the recording, people won't be able to see them. So fear of rejection, yes, that's a very good one. A bit of link to lack of confidence, I suppose. All 4, someone's saying lack of confidence, too much experience, someone's saying there. So that's interesting. If you want to add any more comments about that, that'd be good. Inertia and lack of confidence. How do you change career direction? That's a very interesting one. Reinventing yourself. I won't go into my background now, but I started out in something very different, and I sort of made my way through different roles until I retrained and set up my own business, something, by the way, I thought I'd never do. So that's quite interesting. Lack of confidence, knowledge how to find suitable roles. So hopefully some of what we'll cover today will help. All four. Can I find something better at all? That's a really good point, because we always think the grass is greener, don't we, in lots of things in life. And so that's a valid comment. Lack of confidence, all four. Diverse experience, but young and expensive. Okay, and age again. So quite a few things there. So thank you very much for sharing that. I know some of you have sent me that privately. That's why I haven't given your names, in case you want to stay anonymous. So those are the reasons. Let's move forward and think about what this job search process looks like. Ooh, sorry, I've clicked on one too many. So here, these are the sort of stages that I'm going to talk through today, focusing on some more than others. So starting with mindset and situation. So this is really about thinking, am I in the right place to look for a new job? Now, sometimes we have a situation such as redundancy where we don't really have a lot of choice, or even voluntary redundancy. But often, if we're in a role, it can take a bit of time before we really feel ready. To give you an example, the client I'm starting to work with this afternoon, I first spoke to her about image and impact a bit more in general, but a little bit in this area over 2 years ago. So she's a very senior level client, but so it's taken her a while to think about, where do I want my career to go? When am I going to be ready? And okay, now I'm ready for help. So thinking about mindset and situation, are you there? Then importantly, preparing. And we're going to go into quite a lot of depth there about what that means, because the preparation stage is extremely important. I can't emphasize that enough. So if you don't prepare well, the rest of the process is going to be quite tough going. Thirdly, engaging, which is starting to make yourself more visible in the job market, putting yourself out there, and we're going to talk about that too. And of course, going for interviews, very important and obvious. We want to come across well. Now, hopefully, if we've done the upfront work well, those interviews will be for jobs that are valid for us and going to work for us. It's all part of the preparation to make sure we're sat in interviews for organisations that are going to be a good fit for us and for the organisation itself, through to, of course, hopefully a job offer. If not the first thing you go for, then somewhere down the line. So that looks like a nice linear process here, doesn't it? But in the real world, it really isn't like that. And sometimes it jumps around a bit. So this afternoon's client's a good example. She knows she needs to work on LinkedIn profile, CV, all those other things. But actually, a headhunter's got in touch with an interesting approach. So actually, we need to do a bit of mock interview work. And maybe she'll get that, and we won't need to go and do the CV LinkedIn piece. So sometimes things do happen before you're prepared for them, and you've just got to evaluate whether it's an opportunity you want to go for or not. So certainly when I work with my clients, I work flexibly, and we might be working on LinkedIn CV preparation, but then an opportunity comes and we divert and we do something on impact at interview next. So just thinking about, there's a nice linear process in theory, but might not look like that for you. So don't worry if it doesn't. So firstly, just to talk about this mindset situation piece again. So I've got a golfer teeing up here to sort of outline and highlight that this is about being ready to go to the job market. And often there are, as I mentioned a minute ago, push and pull factors, perhaps pushing you, you're unhappy in your current role, you don't see career progression ahead, perhaps there are issues with the people around you that you don't think are solvable and you've had enough. Perhaps there are flexibility issues, you need to change how you work and your current organisation won't support you in that. And of course, the pull factors of opportunities elsewhere, a sort of sense of moving on, refreshing, new opportunities. So of course that, as well as, the way out sign, demonstrating that sometimes we are shown the way out, maybe not by our own choice, we're made redundant, or we see an opportunity to take voluntary redundancy. So ideally, we'd be in this nice place of being ready to go to the job market, but sometimes surprises do happen, and it's up to you really. If you weren't really in the mindset for a new job, but one comes your way, whether or not you might progress ahead with that. So just moving on, let's talk about the preparing. So this is where I've got quite a lot to say, and I can't emphasize enough, as I said earlier, how important this stage is. So imagine you're in the mindset of looking for a new role, or you certainly know you have to because you're being made redundant. Preparation is absolutely key. And the reason for this is this is all about your shop window to the job market. It's about what you are communicating to that market about yourself and the impact you're going to have. And really, time spent here will save you hassle later on, and make sure you're focused on going for the right things and not going for interviews for things that really just aren't right for you. So it increases the likelihood of you getting the right role for you and more quickly. So I don't want to scare you, but really don't underestimate the time for this. Sometimes people are in a panic and they think, oh, I need to get a new job quick. And they just sort of go out there with a half-baked CV, haven't looked at their LinkedIn profile, haven't thought about what's online, and really just end up wasting a lot of time and not getting into the right opportunities. And I have spent hours locked in rooms with my clients, working on their CVs and their LinkedIn profiles, and working on it outside the time together, and really crafting those so that they showcase people in the best possible way. So LinkedIn, if you read my blogs, my articles, my newsletters, you'll know how important I believe LinkedIn is for professional success, because it is that window on the world. And the reason it's so important is that people can look at us on LinkedIn. We can actually have no idea they've looked at us and rule us completely out without us ever knowing. So that might be if headhunters, recruiters, companies are doing that. Or even for me, people might look at me and think, well, I need someone to help me with my personal impact or to help with networking, and rule me out just by what they see. So putting thought into it is really important. Also, people can often be quite lazy. And even if a recruiter or a company has received your CV, it's often easier and more exciting to go onto LinkedIn and flick through your profile. There's just something more interactive about it. They can scan down the page. So if that's not in a good state, and certainly supporting your CV and what you're going to go and say at interview, that can really let you down and lead to you not progressing in a process. And actually, it's a massive opportunity for each of us to showcase more about ourselves. When you think what more you can put on LinkedIn versus a CV, so you can put a photo, you can add some media, if you've done any videos or talks in your role that you're able to share. There's more space. It's actually just clearer, and you can put your experience and other interests and things in, bring a bit more personality to who you are than you can on the CV. So it's actually a real opportunity. And what I recommend you doing, this is something I do with my clients when I start with them, unless we're having to start immediately with mock interviews and things, is to brainstorm your experience and expertise. So if I'm doing this with a client, I will sit and say, just talk to me about your last X roles, whatever we think is important. And that enables me to pull out what's really happened for them, what's really important, what definitely they should be showcasing to any potential employer. And I'd really recommend you do this, because it's very easy to actually just go with the standard things you've done and forget everything else. So actually a more sort of open approach can really be helpful, even if you've kept your LinkedIn profile and CV fairly up to date. So just really trying to open that out. So what have you really achieved? And actually, in listening to my clients in this way, I find they dig out things that perhaps they'd forgotten about. What else in terms of LinkedIn? Well, that's the sort of obvious things of making sure your job roles really represent the things you've done and achieved. But there are other things that are really important of LinkedIn. So dare I say the photo, people are going to look at that first. We might not like it, but people will come to an assumption about us from the photo. So the biggest piece of advice here is make sure you're looking at the camera and make sure it looks like you. So I had a client I worked with last year. I just finished working with her this month. And when I looked at her LinkedIn profile photo, I formed a certain impression of her. And rightly or wrongly, my impression was she was fairly conservative, quite serious. You know, starting to think what sort of person she might be in my mind. When I went to meet her, she was nothing like her LinkedIn profile picture. She was full of life, really chatty, a lot more youthful than the picture portrayed. And I was really quite surprised and obviously adjusted my behaviour accordingly. But the reason that is an issue is that when somebody meets you at interview, you don't want them to be spending time thinking, oh, she's nothing like her photo, or, oh, he really isn't, you know, the same as the impression I got. And whilst we can't fully control that, it is important to make sure that photo does resemble you. Secondly, banner. So there is an opportunity to add a photo element above your picture on LinkedIn. So my client last year worked in the transport sector. She put a photo that sort of emphasised that at the top. And part of the reason for bothering with that is just it shows you're bothered and you've made some effort. You haven't just left the standard blue picture with I think it's white flecks in it. So think about putting an image in there that might be relevant for the sort of work you do, the sector. Just make sure it works well with the photo of you. Make sure your headline is really clear. Think about the keywords in it, because if recruiters, companies are searching, it is this that will impact whether or not you come up in searches. And make sure whatever you put in that headline makes sense to people outside your organization. You know, there are many titles that exist internally that make complete sense in that big corporate, but in a headline to anybody else don't really make any sense at all. So think carefully about that. Next point is the summary. Really think about what you're putting here. This should complement what all your recent experience says, but think about what's in the summary and importantly, what shows up on someone's page before they have to click see more. So the first few lines, have a think about that. We've talked about the job roles, but of course the most recent ones will be the most important. Make sure there's a clear flow between your roles, that it makes sense why you've moved from role to role. And you know, I certainly with clients make sure this is really clear for interviews as well, that they can explain why they've made the moves they've made. The next point is one that many people, certainly in big corporates, ignore. People that run businesses like me are very hot on doing it generally, but people that are in big businesses don't really think about it, and that's getting recommendations. So there's the place on LinkedIn you can ask people to give you a recommendation. If you can try and get some from a variety of people that you work with, so colleagues, clients, maybe other partners, my recommendation would always be to ask somebody offline first, either on the phone or online, I suppose, via an email. Never just send them the link cold, requesting a recommendation. Sometimes you might need to outline what you actually want them to put. I certainly stay clear from ever writing it for people. Sometimes my clients will say, oh, if you just write it and I'll paste it in. I don't really like doing that because I want it to be genuinely from them. But sometimes it's helpful to outline to people, can you just talk about, you know, the situation, why we ended up working together, what we actually did, importantly, what you did and contributed, and what the result was. So recommendations, you know, if you can try and get 3 to 5 to start with, just something on there so that section's not blank. Professional qualifications, particularly if you're in a very technical sector. I mean, obviously, if you're in legal and you've been a solicitor for years, it's probably obvious that you have a law degree, but you know, you might need to just tick a box with some of those things. If you're in engineering as well, anything like that, just the professional qualifications. And then quite a nice thing to add is just involvement with other societies. One of my clients last year was involved with STEM, so supporting young women to get into those sectors, and she wanted to highlight that because that's important to her, so there's an opportunity to do that on LinkedIn. My final tip with updating LinkedIn would be to switch off the setting that updates your connections that you've just updated things, because otherwise they'll keep getting an update every time you've updated one section. Wait till you've got your final thing to update, maybe it's your photo, and then turn it back on just before you do that, so then your connections see that you've got some updates. Any questions briefly on that LinkedIn? Please do pop them into the chat. Let's just pause briefly and see if anybody's got any questions. So one question here, would you pay to see who is viewing you? So that's a good question. I don't pay actually for LinkedIn Premium. I am going to look at it, but if you don't pay, you might notice from your profile, you can see, I think, the last 5 people that have viewed you. I tend to try and look daily who has viewed my profile, so I kind of stay on top of it. I know I'm missing a lot of people, and if I think those connections are suitable for me, I will often invite those people to connect with me, and I would recommend you do the same. We'll perhaps touch on this again later on, but if you are seriously job hunting, you might want to pay for a month or two, perhaps, to see more broadly who is looking at you. Should we replicate our CV on LinkedIn? I'm going to come to that in a minute when I talk about CV, but it shouldn't be exactly the same. I think there's opportunity to vary it slightly, but obviously the key points should be broadly the same. And is the headline different from the summary? Yes, it is. The headline is the very sort of short line that comes under your name, and the summary is the bigger piece where you can write a few paragraphs. How to avoid people see you are looking for a job. This is a tricky one, because clearly if you don't do much on LinkedIn and you suddenly start doing a load and you're connected to colleagues, they might sense you're looking for a job. So what you might want to do is, if you're not looking for a job already, gradually increase the activity. I'm going to talk about things to increase your visibility shortly. People that are maybe out of work might put something in their title to clearly indicate they are looking for a job. But the main other way is just to think about your activity. And yes, you're right, someone's made the point, you can often get a 3-month trial of premium. Someone's saying it's worth doing. Yes, it can be worth doing. I had a real problem stopping them charging me when I do that. So all I'd say is, if you don't want to carry on, cancel it early enough that you can sort that out if not. Okay, thank you. I'm going to carry on. I will come back to the chat and take other questions as well. So let's move on to CV. So, of course, we are going to use what we've done in our brainstorm, whether you're doing that with me or on your own, to feed your CV. And some elements can be replicated here. But often what I tend to do a bit differently with clients on here is, on your CV, split it quite clearly within the roles with key achievements and responsibilities. I think that works quite effectively on your CV. In LinkedIn, what I might do is put the achievements in the summary, and then the roles are more about what I was actually doing, my responsibilities. So that's hopefully answers the question we just had on that, and to give you a bit more clarity. The CV, I really can't emphasize enough how it must be really a maximum of 2 pages. I've seen some that are 5 to 6. And I know it's really hard, especially if you're an experienced professional and you've had a lot of roles, what to leave out. And that's something I worked on with a client last year. She had a very long CV and we spent time cutting that down. And the reason for that is people when they receive CVs, particularly recruiters, they need to have a filtering system. And I know when I was a candidate coordinator as well, and who's going to read 6 pages? And it often just shows that you're unable to be concise and clear about what you can offer. So I can't emphasize enough how the 2 pages is important, and how you set out your CV, the impression that you're giving from that. Really think about what's still relevant if you have got a lot of culling to do. I mean, for example, I worked in Debenhams when I was 16. Is that still relevant now? No way. So that's gone for sure. So just that might be an obvious example, but there are other things that we feel quite wedded to. Perhaps we were quite proud of that role. We really enjoyed it. But really think about, if it was 15, 20 years ago, does it still have a role to play on there? And perhaps if it has a role in your story, at interview, you might refer to it, even if it's not on your CV, but just be really, really clear about what you're trying to communicate about yourself on there. I started work with the new client I talked about earlier last week, and her CV was a very good design, excellent, but what we do need to work on is the wording, the messaging, because she's got quite a lot of lists of adjectives, with commas obviously separating them, but people just sort of lose the messaging. You've got to think about, what do I really want to come across about myself? What difference can I make? What impact can I really have on the person reading this? Okay, so CV. The last one is a quick one. This is just about checking out what's out there about you, really, on social media. I think it's less of an issue, actually, for people I tend to work with. I tend to work with more experienced professionals. The generations coming up have perhaps got a bit more to worry about what's out there on social media. When I was 18 and on holiday in Tenerife, photos were on film, and they're not really on social media, so I don't have much to worry about there. Particularly if you've got an unusual name like mine, you do want to Google yourself and see what's out there, because people will Google you. Even when we go to meetings now, and we're meeting somebody new, we'll Google them. Usually go to LinkedIn, but you might look at Google too. So do think about what's out there. And really controlling what's out there starts with having good settings on your social media. Today is not really all about online profile, but this, I can't emphasize enough. Think about those carefully, on Facebook especially. Who do you want to be able to see your profile? I have a policy as well, that I don't connect with clients and people I know through work on my Facebook personal profile. I've got a business page and people can like that, and that's fine. I've got a couple of colleagues that are also close friends that I've known for a long time on Facebook, but certainly if any clients invite me to be friends on Facebook, I don't accept that. I keep quite a clear boundary there, because you just really want to control about who sees what on the internet. So think carefully about that. That's really just a checkpoint, something you need to do. The next bit is about doing some thinking. When I said to you earlier about, if you've thought about what you want and what you want to progress, it will make your job search a lot more productive and you'll waste less time. So it's important to spend time reflecting. So many people are desperate to get a new role, and they think it's all about who wants them. But actually, it's thinking about, as you get approached or an opportunity comes up, is this the right thing for me? Does it fit with what I'm looking for? So if you've done some upfront thinking, it helps you to decide whether you're going to go for opportunities or not, ask the right questions, and ultimately make the right decision for you. So I had a client last week, and she had an interview for a full-time role on the Thursday and for a contract role on the Friday. And actually, when she thought about it, she decided she'd rather have the contract role if she had a choice. So she wouldn't accept the interview on the Thursday for the full-time role, which you might say, well, surely, full-time role's better. But she just decided the job description wasn't ideal for her. She preferred the Friday one, and she'd rather spend time preparing. So because she'd done upfront thinking and had some criteria that enabled her to make that choice, rather than actually being in a bit of a panic, trying to prepare for both because they're consecutive days and not getting either. So really just helps you to think. But these pictures here just illustrate the things you might want to think about. So the clock, about timing, how flexible do you need a role to be? Do you want it to be part-time? Not necessarily for family reasons, but one day a week you might want to do something else. You might want flexible working, to work at home a couple of days a week. Is that possible with this role? Location, you know, one of my clients was offered, I think, something in Nottingham to go for an interview there, and she thought, well, great role, but actually, am I ever going to move to Nottingham? No. Am I going to want to stay up there several nights a week, every week? No. So actually, it wasn't the right thing for her. There were priorities in another area, and she just had to weigh that up. Remuneration and benefits, of course, you know, some people have got, you know, a set amount of money they do need to earn. We all need to pay the bills, so thinking about that and the other benefits. Thinking about the culture and working environment of the organisation. So we can get a feel for that by meeting the people, but also researching online. Important to think, does this suit us? You know, if you're somebody that prefers to work in the office, not at home, but actually the culture is that lots of people work at home most of the time, you might be pretty demotivated sat in the office by yourself. You might find that actually hard to work. I have a friend of mine, she's a director in a property company, and she can't stand working at home, you know, so she just feels that she needs people around her to inspire her, motivate her. So while she might spend the odd, you know, morning at home to get something really key done, she knows for her that's not a model that works. So finding out about that. Even something such as dress, you know, is it a formal environment? Is it a casual environment? Does that suit you? You know, does that make you feel comfortable? The amount of travel, are you going to be required to travel abroad for a week, a month? What does that look like? I had somebody I was speaking to the other week, and she's thinking about going for new roles. We're looking to work together next month. And she said, finally, my daughters have gone to university. So actually now I can take the role I want, and if that involves travel, then that's absolutely fine. So thinking about how much travel, do you want any travel there? And of course, responsibilities and your remit. What is in your job description? What's in your book? What's going to be landing on your lap? Is that what you want to be doing? So there might not be absolutes here, but it's just having an idea of what are the key things for you, what are your ideals, and of course, where you're prepared to make trade-offs. Then there's thinking about which companies, organisations do I really want to target? Who would I really like to work for? Am I focusing on a sector? Is it more about the specific job role? What is that for me? And just having a thought around that. And particularly if you're targeting specific organisations, having an idea why you want to work for them, so that, you know, if you approach them, you can be quite clear about that. You know, increasingly potential employers are looking for people that are strong technically, but have also got great people skills and have passion and enthusiasm for the organisation and what they're going to do. So thinking about how you can convey that is important. So a client of mine was looking at roles recently, and one in particular stood out because 50% of the role was looking after the commercial aspect, 50% was more educational, and that really appealed because she was keen on looking at those sorts of things, not just being purely commercial, but thinking about how can we educate people in schools, up and coming. So that was a very good fit for her to go for. So have a think about that. Then think about, you know, who can help me? What are the contacts I have already? Of course, on LinkedIn, you know, it's easy to search people in companies. Who do I know already that might work in organisations I'm interested in, or who's linked to people in those organisations? Can I get any introductions? So I know one of my clients was going for a role and then found out that one of their key connections was also working in that company, and that was quite helpful because that connection was then prepared to give them a bit more insight. So how can your existing network help you? Your personal network as well, although arguably I think you should have your personal network on LinkedIn, so hopefully they'd come up in that search. And of course, thinking about recruiters that you've used before, perhaps that you found were good, perhaps your friends, your colleagues, even if people know you're looking for a new role, who can connect you to people that are helpful. Okay, so really thinking about that. Don't be afraid to use your network. And that's why I always say to people, being on LinkedIn and using it fairly actively from as early as possible is really helpful, because you can't build a network the minute you want one. So even if you're not looking for a role now, I'd strongly advise you start working on your profile and your visibility on LinkedIn. So before I move on to the engaging stage, has anybody got any questions that they would like to ask about that? So, should you say you're redundant or keep current job live? I think on LinkedIn, if it's not been ages, it's sort of a month, you can maybe leave it. More than that, I think it could be seen as a bit deceptive. But if people don't ask you the direct question at interview, then I'm not suggesting you lie at all, but you don't have to make it obvious that you don't currently have a role. Anything else? Right, well, if you think of anything, do type it in. I will move on to engaging so that we can look at that. So once you've done your groundwork, I updated your profile on LinkedIn. It's about increasing your visibility. Now, if you do quite a bit on LinkedIn already, then you've probably got less to think about here. But what you're aiming for is, it's not just you having to ring up recruiters, search for opportunities. Actually, headhunters and other people are spotting you. Often you probably get approached by recruiters when you don't want them. But if you do some updates and some visibility work, then hopefully they start to approach you a bit more. And many of my clients have had this happen. One way of actually measuring the impact of your improved profile is to look at your stats at the beginning. So look at things like how many times have you appeared in searches, how many people have viewed your profile, and that can be quite reassuring to show that the work you've done has been worth it. And it can be hard if you're not a regular user of LinkedIn, but just trying to allocate a small amount of time, I'd say ideally each day, it just has to be 10 minutes, is better than say doing an hour on a Friday, just to get used to doing a few things. And the things I would focus on if I were you would be increasing your connections to over 500. Apparently there's an algorithm in LinkedIn that you come up in more searches once you're over 100. Always personalize your connection note on LinkedIn in whatever situation. Never just send the standard one. That's something I help my clients devise depending on their job search situation as to what they say in that. So you can create some standard messages that you can copy and paste in, and then just tailor a little bit for the person. As we mentioned a little while ago, look at who's visited your profile, and if appropriate, connect with them and send an appropriate message. Another way is joining relevant groups. This could be really good for your profile in your industry or your function anyway. So finding relevant groups on LinkedIn is good to get your visibility up with key people. And then actually it can be easier to invite some of those people to connect if you feel they've already seen you in groups. So perhaps they've liked some things you've shared, for example. Make sure you interact with others' content. It's not just about putting yourself out there, that you read their articles, like a few things, share things. Really good for getting your visibility up. And if you can, create some of your own content. Can you show some thought leadership? Write about something to do with your sector. Doesn't have to be about your company. That might not be appropriate, but just think about what could you tangibly write. Of course, you can use the jobs section to look up specific roles you might want to apply for, and think about what you want to go for there. And just really be thinking about who you want to connect with, using the search function. As I said, if you've got a list of organisations you're targeting, who do you know in those organisations that might be able to help you or give you an idea if any roles are coming up? So really using it as a networking tool. So engaging with recruiters, I'd always recommend people call. You don't really want to go out there and get 20 recruiters looking for roles for you, that can become a bit unmanageable. So I'd select a few and call them. That will really help you stand out, because most people just rely on email or LinkedIn messaging. So call them, and always be ready to then follow up with an email referring to the call you've just made and attaching your CV, and if there's a specific opportunity, maybe a cover letter. And even if they approach you on LinkedIn or email, always worth a call back as well. It's far more impactful. People massively underestimate the value of a call. So see what you can do there. And, think about very carefully who you engage with. I had a client recently who was asked to apply for a role and was given the name of the company, but no job description. So, really think about what you're going to engage with. I wouldn't suggest that's a really good thing to do, because you have no idea if you'd want the role. How can you tailor any covering letter or your CV? So just think about what are those interactions with recruiters and what's going to be valuable. And of course, you can always go to company sites directly as well. If you've got your targeted list, that many of them have a section with available roles to apply for on, so that's worth doing. I sort of touched on this a second ago, but be really careful not to be juggling too many balls in the air at once. You don't want to set lots of things off and then it's unmanageable. And people often do this when they're panicking about looking for a new role. And as I said earlier, if you've done the upfront preparation and you know what you want, it's easy to know what you should be going for. So you can continually be assessing, have I got enough opportunities in the pipeline? What's the likelihood desirability? So someone, I think it was the week before last now, didn't get the role that they'd gone for, but actually could see they have another 5 opportunities on the go, of which 3 are really strong possibilities. So actually you might think, well, I'll wait a week or 2 to see if I set anything else going. And that's particularly the case if you're still in a role, because you just don't want to be panicked and actually going to a load of interviews, stressing about how you're going to find time for them, get out of work, and actually not do a good job of representing yourself in any of them. So really think carefully about how you're going to manage your job search process. And that's something I work with my clients on, and continually evaluating the opportunities that are coming up and thinking about what to do next. Don't just think about the interactions on sort of sending your CV, LinkedIn, but think about all the communication you're having with recruiters, headhunters, companies. Put time into wording chase emails or what you're going to say in a call. Plan that, because it adds to or subtracts from the overall impact you're having on those people. Many of them, especially recruiters and headhunters, will be speaking to lots of candidates, and you want to stand out really strongly as having a really positive and consistent communication style and clarity about what you're saying. You want to be positively memorable, and certainly when I'm working with my one-to-one clients, we talk about what that looks like and how you're going to make that happen. I even, in between sessions, I help people craft appropriate follow-up emails and make sure that we're having the best possible communication with those recruiters and potential employers to make a strong impact and hopefully get the right result. Be very organised in your job search. Links to the too many balls in the air, but just thinking about what have I got on the go? Who do I need to be following up with? It's a bit like if you run a business, your new business pipeline. Who do you need to be keeping in touch with? My one-to-one clients, I supply them with a template to help them keep track of that and making sure we've got everything moving along nicely. If I'm being really blunt, and I'm sorry if there are any recruiters on the call, but recruiters, headhunters are often not the best at coming back to you unless they have something really pressing on their radar. So you need to find a way to be visible to them without being really irritating and calling them up every day, but having a plan for what your communication with them will be. And if you've put the effort into your tools up front and what you want, then this stage should be quite easy, because you've got everything there ready to go. It's actually just about managing the opportunities. So before I move on to talk about interview stages, has anybody got any questions? No, I'm not seeing any questions, so I shall move on. Again, I'll come back to questions at the end if you've got any. So we've applied for some roles. We've now got some interviews coming up, and it's really important at this point to really think about how you come across, and it's part of the planning, and certainly what I'm going to be doing with this client this afternoon. And interviews are often a multi-stage process, so you've got different things to think about, but ultimately there are two key things. You will make an impact on the interviewer or interviewers in less than 10 seconds. Harvard research shows that first impression is extremely quick. Some people would say that the job is won or lost in those first 10 seconds. Up to you how much weight you put onto that. But certainly thinking about that initial impact, everything from the minute you first see the interviewer or interviewers. So thinking about that and how you're coming across through your appearance, body language, and C is for communication stroke voice. So thinking about what is really coming across about me through those three things. So appearance would be things like even your dress. Are you dressed appropriately for the role? That's a lot more fluid these days. It's not necessarily about wearing the very smart suit. What's right for the role you're going for? Body language, what gestures have you got? How are you positively engaging or not with the potential employer? And thinking about your voice. Is there enough strength in your voice? Is it the right pace so that people can take in? And overall, how do you build rapport with the interviewer or interviewers so that you're positively memorable? Often interviewers will see maybe 4 people, maybe more in a day. How are you going to be the one that stands out at the end of the day? So really vital to think about that. And it's really hard because we don't have a camera follow us around, so we don't actually know how we come across to others. This is why with my clients we do mock interviews, because then we can really look at how they felt about it, how they felt they came across, and I can give my opinion as well. I worked with somebody, I think it's the year before last now, very senior in an engineering company. And when we did the mock interview, it was really interesting because when I was asking her the questions, she didn't listen to me asking the full question. She'd cut me off before I'd finished. She sort of, in some situations, banged the table and said, absolutely. So there's 3 things there. She had no idea she did any of those. And it was out of a positive motivation. It was enthusiasm. But actually, as the interviewer, I just thought, oh, this is a bit over the top. She didn't listen to the question, so she couldn't answer it well. And just the small habit of saying absolutely, well, that's not an answer to a question. That's a response to a statement. So she had no clue she did those things. And this is a really senior person. I can't remember how many years work experience, but probably 20 plus, but maybe even 30. So we worked on what are the new behaviours to replace those. And of course, that's not something you change in 2 minutes, but we worked on that so that she came across a lot more strongly. Then, of course, is showcasing your experience and expertise. How does that come across? And I work with clients on this in detail, as often they're not quite sure what to highlight. And if we've done all that brainstorming work at the front that's feeding LinkedIn and CV, then of course this feeds questioning as well. So we work through key interviewed questions. That's part of the mock interview, and then where they need enhancing, we work on crafting the answers so that they're authentic to the person and real, but just to bring out exactly the right things for people. So the interviewer is really clear on what you're good at and how and why you'd fit this role. And the right level of detail is really important to judge. So sometimes people give far too much detail, sometimes far too little. And I often say when you're answering a question, there are 3 things to think about. There's maybe the context for your answer, the action, what you actually did, and the result. And I had a client last year and she was sort of focusing at least 60% really of her answers on the context, so giving me the detail of the company she was working for, whereas actually a bit of that is necessary so people have in mind what's going on, but actually the real focus should be the action and the result, so what you actually did. So thinking about how you're going to answer key questions and what you want to showcase about yourself is vital. Of course, there are often, as I said earlier, different context to interviews. It might just be a one-to-one, it might be a group exercise, you might have a panel interview, or you might have a presentation. I mean, very often one of the stages is simply just some questions, and maybe more in-depth questions the next time. But it's important to think about the nuances and the different challenges. So it's very different managing a panel interview versus a one-to-one interview. So certainly I always talk to my clients about how to manage the room. If we know who the interviewers are, we think about what their agendas might be and how to manage that carefully. So one of my clients, I think we identified that one of the interviewers was the person she'd be working most closely with. So we talked about what her priorities might be and how she could best highlight how she might meet that. And certainly for a presentation as well, you know, if you're used to presenting, then fine, that'll probably be an easier part for you. But if it's not something you do a lot, or perhaps not about your own skills or the specific topic you're being asked to present on, you need to really prepare well for that. One of my clients, she was asked to talk about her leadership style. And in fact, although she had a very senior role, she hadn't had a formal team. She was working in a matrix organisation and sort of worked with people from different functions and departments. So of course she did have a leadership style and things she could talk about, but she never actually really thought about it. So we worked in depth on what she was going to highlight there, and how she was going to position herself well for the role. So of course then hopefully we get a job offer at some point, the happy moment arrives, and this is obviously a point of celebration, but it's also important to think about whether it's the right opportunity for you. So reflecting on the criteria we set earlier, our ideals, our must-haves, thinking about that. So sometimes I help my clients reflect at this point, and also think about the elements to negotiate here, not just salary, but other things like starting time, perhaps details of job description, responsibility, flexibility, travel. So it's a very important part often of what my clients talk over with me. And again, thinking about, is this right for me, not just right for the employer? Okay, so even if I'm not still working with a client formally, often they'll give me a quick call or send me a quick email and ask for an opinion at this stage. So I will, it's almost an hour since we started now. I will open up the floor for questions in a minute if you've thought of anything else. But I just wanted to finish with a reminder really of the three key things that I think need to stand out to you. Firstly, get your tools sorted. So do put the time into LinkedIn and CV especially. Be really clear on what you are looking for. So that reflection piece, what is it? What are my boundaries around all of this? And thirdly, be really organised, particularly if you are still in a role, because otherwise you could just end up feeling really stressed and annoyed with yourself if you've not managed to give your best to an opportunity. So just briefly, I've told you quite a bit about the work I do with my clients. Really, the main things I bring to my clients are get them to focus on what's really important about their experience and expertise and how to highlight that. My third-party expert opinion, I mean, the client this afternoon described it to me as, I need a mirror to me for how I come across at interview. The support I provide throughout, so it's not just I zoom in, give you a few tips and leave again. I'm here if you need to ask me in depth. And the biggest thing that people say I do give them is the confidence in their abilities, to bring those out in the right way, to make sure they know how they come across and what they need to work on. Typically, I work with clients on this through my career impact program, so the job hunting focus. We usually have sort of 4 1.5-hour sessions that are maybe focused on the preparation work, LinkedIn, CV, planning and strategy, i.e. stages 2 and 3, sort of preparing and engaging, and then another 4 sessions where we focus on the interviews that are coming up and the different interviews types that might come up too. But as I said earlier, it's not always neat, and sometimes it's a bit of a mix of the two, a hybrid. And I do write up all the notes after each session, so that you're not having to focus on doing that when we're talking, and send you other resources such as key questions. And then I'm available for ad hoc questions in between as well. So in a minute, I will invite your questions, but just to let you know what happens next, I'll be sending you the replay of this webinar. If you've got any questions at all, please do reply with those or give me a call. If you are interested in whether I could help you for where you're at, then I'm very happy to have a sort of 30-minute one-to-one call to discuss that from your perspective, to understand where you're at and whether it's something I can help you with. You know, I can't help every prospective client that calls me up, but I do like to discuss that with people, and I never work with clients without having a discussion first. And I'm not going to sit here and say to you, oh, if you sign up by next week, there's a X% discount, because I just don't work like that. I don't want to push people into making a quick decision. And also, you know, you may not be in a position to do this work now. You know, you might want to come back to me in 6 months' time and ask some questions then and explore a bit further. And that's absolutely fine. But my encouragement to you would be to think about, where are you in your career? You know, what is my situation regarding a new role? If it's not now, when am I thinking I might like to move? And what's the preparation I need to do? And if you're not actively looking for a new role now, I would still really encourage you to think about the preparation that you might want to start doing now, so that it's easier. Okay, so I'd like to take your questions now, and I can see a few more have come in since I last went to the chat. So if you'd like to send any more in, I'll just spend a few minutes answering those. So how can you get feedback from recruiters' interviews? I know how hard that is. Often there's quite a lot of laziness and people are worried about saying the truth. I'd really push recruiters and companies for feedback if you can. You know, don't just accept what they first tell you. If you want to probe a bit more, then do try that. You won't always get an answer, but I would really encourage you, because that's how we learn what we can work on, is direct feedback too. Sometimes the clients I work with come and say, oh, actually, the criticism I've had is that I don't have great personal impact when I walk in a room. So I did some work with a client in the judiciary last year, and she was going for a role for a second time. And the feedback she'd had the first time was it was down to her appearance, which sounds terrible, I know, but that was the candid feedback that she'd had. So, you know, at least she knew that, and we worked on that, and she got the role. So just, you know, trying to get that feedback is really worthwhile. Acknowledge to recruiters working with more than one, definitely. You know, they don't have a monopoly on you, and you know, I don't think that's any problem at all. I think most recruiters would expect that. As I said earlier, though, just be careful how many you've got going. Virtual interview like Skype, do we behave as a face-to-face interview? Very, very good question. Often there's a sense of more informality with that. I would tend to treat it very similarly, though. Think about how you're going to prepare. You don't really want to be looking down at notes all the time just because it's virtual and you think you might be able to get away with it. Make sure you test the technology. One of my clients had some really poor feedback on a Skype interview she just did with a recruiter. So it's not just the same. Do think about how you're coming across, because we've got less to communicate ourselves with. So think about that. Might worth me adding at this point, telephone interview, if it's not visual as well, think about planning for that carefully. Think about how you sit, the right kind of chair. So for instance, you can't see me now, but I'm sat in a very upright chair to make sure my voice projects well. So think about that. You know, try not to sit in your pajamas because it does affect your mindset. Often standing up can work for people on the phone, so just think about how you might prepare for that. Someone's saying they've got a second interview with the CEO over lunch at a restaurant. Oh, very interesting indeed. So that sounds like it's a bit more informal. Simple tip, think about what food you order. You don't want to, even if it's, you know, not causing an issue as he or she looks at you, if you feel uncomfortable eating it, think about that. Think about how you're sitting, how, you know, sitting up well, not just slouching at the table. Think about how you come across, making sure you've got some upfront small talk to make. often that sort of interview is more about them feeling out what kind of person are you. So don't just think about answering standard interview questions, but how can I build rapport with this person? How can I show interest? You don't say whether it's an internal or external opportunity, but how can I really show interest in their business and where it's at and what I can add? So maybe more emphasis on the questions you might ask. If you want to talk to me more about that, then reply to the email I send or get in touch with me and I help you a bit further. Someone else here saying that they'd like to take up a 30-minute discussion. Please just email me or reply to the email that I'll send out hopefully either later today or tomorrow with the recording to talk to me about that. Thanks for the session. What's the best way to work out exactly? Oh, sorry, I lost the question. What's the best way to work out exactly what we are looking for? Is there a quiz or test you'd recommend? That's a very good point. I tend to talk through with my clients the key areas I brought up on that slide, and because I've got to hear them talking about their roles in the brainstorm, I can sometimes help them identify that. So difficult to do by yourself, I think. So if you're not going to work with someone like me, then perhaps a friend can help you talk through that. I don't think there is a set quiz or test, but thinking about those key areas I pointed out is a good start. I've just been made redundant and want to retire at the end of 2019. How should this be conveyed? I need a bit more background, I feel, to answer that. Do you mean that, oh, I see, you mean you're going for new roles. Oh, I actually probably wouldn't highlight the wanting to retire bit at the end of 2019. That's pretty much 2 years away, so I'm not sure you really need to be focusing on that. No one really, as you go into an interview, wants to hear how you're planning the end of your career, but perhaps I've misunderstood some of the context. If you want to pick up that with me outside of this, then please do. Do I provide my services via FaceTime, Skype too? Yes, I do. The new client last week is based in Switzerland, so I absolutely do that. What usually happens is I end up doing a little bit more work with you across email. So because we're not in a room physically writing your LinkedIn and CV, so we'll do the big brainstorm, I'll give you some outline guidance, you'll work on it, send it back to me, I'll review it, spend some time working on it, writing some bits for you. So it tends to be I just spend a bit more time in between because I'm not traveling to you. And some lovely thank yous. So are you doing any presentations in London over the next few weeks? Not on this topic. I am speaking at a legal event on Wednesday about, this week is about really how important our personal impact is at networking. I'm speaking at the Office Show, which is geared towards PAs and EAs, because often they bring me into companies and I work with them directly. I'm speaking at that on the 1st of March, so that's at Olympia, and I'm speaking on personal impact and the tools that we have, and a couple of other talks. I think the Association for Administrative Management, I think I'm speaking at that later this year. So it depends what topic you want. I don't tend to run open workshops. Most of my work is within client organisations, but if you've got a networking organisation within your company, I do come and do a lot of those. I've spoken for Barclays, HSBC. So if I've not got one and you want one, perhaps you can help organise one within your organisation. And thank you very much for the more thank yous. Much appreciated. As I say, if you have got questions, please do email them to me either proactively this afternoon. If I move to the next slide, you can see my details there, even though you have got them already, or just reply to the email that I'll send with the recording. Okay. Any final questions? So thank you very much for all your participation this afternoon. I wish you all the best with where you are in your job search and hope the tips were really useful. Oh, one last question. Do you speak outside the UK? I do. It tends to be usually part of a program, but if a client, you know, I'm doing a global program for a big company at the moment, and I've been traveling to Europe and the US. Got a few more of those to do, but I certainly can travel if your organisation wants me to come and run a workshop for a day. or some other sort of engagement, then I can certainly look at doing that. So that's not a problem. Thank you very much, everybody. I wish you a good afternoon.